My name is Dr. David Edwards. I'm the Head of Talent Solutions for SHL in Middle East and North Africa. So thanks for joining today to look at skills-based talent management. Now, you will notice that you may have noticed that more and more organizations are talking about being a skills-based organization or aspiring to be more of a skills-based organization. So in this particular session, we're going to explore what that really means. What are skills? What are the skills they are referring to? And what would be the benefits of such an approach for your organization, but also maybe for you as individuals or employees as well? And so let's discuss what that looks like in terms of maybe a taxonomy of skills. What types of skills would be in any type of skills-based framework? And how would you assess them? How would you know if people have them? So we're going to cover and explore all these different areas in this session today. So like any other area, it's very good to start out by really defining some things so that when we talk about skills with people, they understand what we mean. And maybe let's look at a definition and maybe a framework of skills. What exactly does it encompass? So what is this skills era that's coming in where organizations are more likely to say they're moving towards being a skills-based organization? Well, it's really a shift from a job-centric approach where jobs are fixed and you need to find someone who fits that very specific role, a person job fit. It sort of assumes that there are abundant workers to fill roles and talent is replaceable. So what we're doing with a skills-based approach is it's a move away from this to a more work-centric approach, which looks at the skills of the person and how they may match the skills required within a role. Now, so it assumes that workers with these skills tend to be quite scarce, and productivity is about maximizing the individual and team outputs. Now, clients are responding to this type of approach. Organizations are responding to this type of approach by doing a number of things. Some of these things can be fast to implement, and others tend to be slower because they really take more time to consider. So for instance, as you can see on this screen itself, fast implementation tends to be around the recruitment area, where you can start using skills-based recruitment processes quite quickly, and they'll have an immediate impact on the organization as you bring people in with the skills you really require. Some things that can be quick to implement, but have a longer-term impact is as you use a more skills-based approach, you tend to find it's easier to retain or keep your people engaged with the organization because internal talent mobility becomes more effective, easier, and fairer. You also, of course, have to change the operating models and the ways you work in the organization. They tend to be slower to implement, but have a long-term impact as well. So all these different things need to be considered when moving to a skills-based approach, but they will bring benefits to the organization itself and to individuals within organizations. Now, actually, it's useful to know what it is we mean by skills. We usually broadly define skills to encompass hard or technical skills, maybe things such as coding, data analysis, accounting, etc. Also, there's human capabilities, which tend to be around things such as critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and maybe potential as well as an additional area. Now, potential really looks at latent qualities, things people have, types of attributes they may have that may help them develop in the future. So potential is also important to look at. And there's two different ways of looking at potential here. One is about upskilling people so they can be mobilized across the organization vertically, not horizontally, not just vertically. So upskilling people so they can have more options of moving to different career paths. But of course, the most traditional way of looking at potential is, do they have the right attributes or skills to move into more senior positions? So there's different ways of looking at skills. There's your hard or your typical technical skills, but really what's becoming clear is human skills becoming much more critical in a skills framework. And I'm going to move on to show you why. Now, when it comes to why organizations would use a skills-based approach, there are several reasons for this. So there's a range of reasons why you might want to use a skill-based approach for talent management in your talent management. They may not be equally important, and some organizations may prioritize them differently as well. So for instance, one of the reasons would be agility, preparing your workforce for the future. This is really about making sure that you actually ensure all employees are highly productive, and so workforce costs are optimized. So that's really pushing people to be more, pushing people to be more effective in the organization because you know what skills they require. There's also agency or inspiring employees and teams to deliver their best. And the key metrics around this is enhancing engagement. Engagement goes up, turnover goes down. These are the key metrics to see that you're using skills-based approaches to help you retain your people and make them highly engaged with the organization. Finally, and just as equally important to some organizations, is the fairness and the inclusivity of using skills-based assessments or skills-based approaches, because it would increase diversity of the types of people that go into certain roles, and it would increase the employer value proposition as well. So not all organizations prioritize these the same, but all are very important to a skills-based approach. Now let's have a little think about what skills are. And so it's really useful to maybe categorize them into different types. So it would be useful then to think about these. One type of skill we could call perishable skills. Now these are your typically traditional hard skills, typically around things such as technology or systems related skills, maybe to particular vendors or platforms, which are sought out and are very important until that particular technology becomes obsolete and they become irrelevant completely. The research tends to show that hard skills tend to have a less of a shelf life. They tend to have, on average, a shelf life of between 2.5 to 3 years for any, and so they're more likely to be phased out quickly in an organization and change dramatically sometimes for roles. Then there's the more semi-durable skills. Now these would be field-specific technologies or frames or bases of knowledge. So for instance, Scrum and Kanban frameworks, they actually are frameworks around a specific field of knowledge. They may be relevant for longer than specific technical skills. Coaching skills, another example. But they may be phased out over the long term as well because better methodologies or frameworks may come along. But they tend to be more durable, semi-durable we call those. Now the durable skills and competencies tend to be the ones around or related to mindset, behaviors or groups of behaviors that make people more effective. Irrespective of changes in the workplace, these types of behaviors tend to be relevant across time and across roles. Examples here might be critical thinking, clear communication, collaboration, etc. These are the types of human skills that no matter how organizations change, what technologies are implemented, these human skills are important across time and across roles. And they're more durable then, quite important skills. Skills tend to be durable across time, as I've said already. So, having had a definition of what skills may be, the types of different skills, and how long-lasting they may be or how durable they may be, what would be the benefits then of a skills-based hiring and mobility approach? So I think probably everyone will agree that the workplace is changing quite rapidly with more and more automation of processes and AI moving very quickly into almost every area we can think of essentially to enhance the efficiencies of our work processes. Now, we should, of course, see this as a positive thing because it then allows us to focus on the areas that humans would be much better placed than machines to deliver. If you've heard of Bersing called these types of human-type attributes power skills, which I'll come back to shortly, of course. This change in workplace means that we need to be more agile and look for skills where potentially we were missing them in the past. Are there people in organizations that have skills that we've missed? Maybe some people in the organization have skills we've totally not identified in them, but would be useful for the organization. A skills-based approach allows you to start identifying talent more precisely. And additionally, it allows you to be very objective about the evaluation of people's skills. So it adds the benefits of fairness and inclusivity into how we approach our workforces. What sort of benefits would you get from having a skills-based approach that helps you with this constantly changing work environment? Well, some organizations have already adopted this type of approach and have found these quite dramatic improvements or benefits from using it. They're likely to achieve results much more likely than if they hadn't adopted the skills-based approach. They're much more likely to place their talent effectively. And their reputation in the environment is to be seen as a great place to grow and develop, a good place to work. They'll be more likely to retain their top performers. And where there's change and where they can anticipate change, they can respond much more agilely and effectively than organizations that don't have this quite adaptive and agile skills-based approach. So organizations have already seen many benefits to implementing such an approach. Now, we, SHL, have seen the benefit of a skills-based approach for the organizations we work with. And so we actually have developed a comprehensive behavioral skills or taxonomy to lend itself to organizations being able to identify the skills required in their workforce, but also then identify if they have these skills in their workforce. It can be used across levels, it can be used across roles. And you can carry out skills reviews with it in an objective manner to help you make more strategic talent management decisions. So this is just one example of, the SHL example of a taxonomy of skills that can be used effectively within such an approach. As you can see here, it looks at very specific skills, 96, which I'll share with you later, that really granularize what you're looking for from people within an organization, so you can be very precise in what you ask for and how you identify if people can fit roles, etc. Now, you'll have noticed from this taxonomy that it is a behavioral skills model. So why would you think this is the most important area to focus on? Well, Josh Bersind studied the area of skills and surveyed HR thought leaders across the globe. And he found that the X factor for future success were these soft skills. It's widely believed that artificial intelligence will not surpass humans in various areas such as social skills, emotional intelligence, and even creativity and innovation. Many people don't see artificial intelligence as surpassing the human beings in these areas. So by actually knowing this, and if employees can ensure they are strong in these areas, they're preparing themselves well for this future work environment, and they can take advantage of the coming golden age of artificial intelligence. So SHL have provided definitions of this framework to aid practitioners. Let's take a look at Bersind's model of what we call power skills. You can see here power skills would include things such as optimism, curiosity, flexibility, integrity. So you can see, if you look across this model, you'll see that the constructs within it tend to really focus on areas that emphasize emotional intelligence, creativity and innovation, critical thinking, and working effectively with others, which clearly we know humans are much better at than any type of technology implemented in the workplace. So as already mentioned, these would make individuals who shine in these aspects better placed in the new work environment. Now, SHL has a wealth of data related to such skills and behaviors that relate to this type of model. So we conducted our own study to explore how these power skills feature in regions, by industry, and over time. Let's take a look at some of this interesting data. Now, using approximately 70,000 sets of data, we mapped power skills to SHL's own skills taxonomy, and we looked at the predominance of these skills across regions. Now, this was done by looking at highest scoring candidates, top third of candidates, for each of the power skills to identify the dominant skills in each region. And as you can see here, we looked for the top 3 per region. Now you can probably see some commonalities in these areas, in these different regions. So each region did show a quite unique profile for the top three of the power skills, where the people there have more of a predominance for these types of skills. So, but optimism, integrity, and generosity featured across the regions. So these types of power skills featured across regions, even though the regions had unique overall top three profiles. Interestingly, some power skills, empathy, followership, curiosity, drive, seem to be much shorter supplies. They don't appear in any of the top three, though they did turn up in some industries. So some interesting thoughts here around the types of power skills that are prevalent in different regions tend to be similar, but also unique. What about the industries? Let's take a look. So when looking at industries, there were some interesting trends. For instance, in the retail industry, retail candidates were 40% more likely to score high on empathy and kindness, and 35% more likely to score on generosity. In fact, retail candidates showed similar strengths to the healthcare candidates, the people likely to apply for healthcare roles. Now, healthcare candidates were 25% more likely to have high levels of kindness, 20% more likely to have high levels of empathy and flexibility compared to other industries. Now, when you move on to banking and financial services, 33% of those candidates tended to be more likely to have strong time management power skills, and 22% more likely to have strong drive and integrity. Compared to individuals in other industries, candidates from the manufacturing industry showed similar strengths, where actually the candidates were 25% more likely to have tenacity, 22% more likely to have ethics and drive. Now what this is quite interesting, because it shows that some of the skills you'd expect from some types of industries are prevalent in other industries too. Would this be the case then, that you could identify talent pools of candidates that may traditionally have been useful or applied for certain types of industries, but would be just as relevant to your own industry, suggesting that there's a larger talent pool out there, and with the right training, they might fit into the roles in your organization, even if they'd actually been candidates or thought about different career paths. This means career pathing could be much more flexible potentially. What about power skills over time? Well, this was quite interesting too, that we did see some trends within this. Now, what we did here to look at skills over time, we compared candidates from 2021 with results of candidates from 2023 for each of the power skills and ranked them by increase in prevalence, from largest change to smallest change. And whilst the majority of power skills showed increases, so candidates in 2023 tended to show more of the power skills than 2021 candidates, suggesting people are developing in these areas over time. The areas of tenacity, kindness, and time management were the most significantly changed. So over time, these things can be developed, and candidates will develop different levels in these power skills over time, and maybe even different combinations. Now, this is all very interesting, I'm hoping you find. But none of that research really definitively answers the question of what skills should we explicitly prioritize in hiring and mobility programs. The topic of potential keeps coming up. So hiring for potential rather than experience. But potential for what? We wanted to definitively answer that question, and SHL felt we quite uniquely are suited to do that, to answer these types of questions for you. So we started by looking at all the attributes that have been asked for in your typical job descriptions. So we looked at many, many different types of job postings, job descriptions, and what they asked for in terms of what. So obviously job descriptions, you'd hope, ask for things that would make people more effective in the role, inshallah. But also we looked at more other ways of looking at roles. So we used ONET, which is a large online database of roles that have been analysed to see what types of attributes people would really require in those roles. And we looked at this to see what is asked for mostly in job postings or on ONET for different types of roles. This is quite interesting in that you'll see here that the Majority of job postings and almost all the jobs on ONET asked for things related to collaboration or ethics and values or dependability or adaptability. There were other things that were identified, but not as much as this. Now, SHL would categorize those areas as being about supporting and cooperating and adapting and coping. So these are the things that are mostly asked for in job postings, but it still doesn't tell us if these attributes are definitively the attributes that will be responsible for better performance. They're asked for, but we don't know if it's actually these things that will make people better in role. So we conducted an even more detailed study around this type of area. So we took our taxonomy of skills, and we conducted a meta-analytic study. So we conducted a study to look at what skills we should broadly value. Are there common sets of skills that broadly predict job performance across roles, across levels of role, across industries? So using the entire 96 skills taxonomy that SHL has developed, we used 10,000 data points and correlated assessment performance to actual job performance or job results. And the study, as I've said, was across roles, industries, and levels. And we interestingly did find some critical skills that are predictive across those industries, across those levels of roles. And what were they? As you can see here, there are 12 specific critical skills that we identified as being very predictive or most predictive of current subsequent job success. And here you can see things such as takes action, strives to achieve, establishes credibility, coordinates, measures. These were mostly measures of initiative, conscientiousness, achievement. They tended to anchor a broad understanding of employee potential and were more predictive of their subsequent success in the role. The measures of adaptability and resilience, as I've mentioned earlier, that most job postings do ask for things about being adaptable and resilient. They tended to be less universally predictive of job success than commonly understood. Maybe still important, but not the most predictive that some people expect it to be. So that's useful to know, these 12 critical skills. Now, what we're not saying here is that all the other skills are irrelevant. But importantly, these cut across industries, these cut across levels of role. The other skills may become more prominent when you consider very specific roles. So there may be very specific roles where this combination may change based on very specific requirements. Interestingly, again, what we found with these skills is if you look at your talent pool, the data suggested younger talent pools outperform in some areas of these 12. Taking responsibility, applying functional expertise, taking action. Younger talent pools tend to have high levels of this type. Women outperform in various areas, using time efficiently, learning quickly, attending to multiple tasks, and minorities outperform in some areas too. So this is quite reassuring because it shows that a skills-based approach would not discriminate in any way against certain groups. It would be more fair and objective, only asking for things relevant to the roles, and these things don't actually discriminate against groups. In fact, certain groups are more likely to show this type of skill. We also looked at motivators, because many people say that different generations are different in the way they're motivated, etc. So we looked at if there were any common motivators across different generations, so we could ascertain if we could have a broader view of motivation. And we did find some commonalities. So for instance, personal principles, personal growth and achievement were motivators across 4 generations. Similarly, there were commonalities about what demotivates, as you can see, fear of failure across 4 of the generations. So we saw some commonalities, and this could be helpful, of course, in terms of what you're trying to do to motivate and retain your staff and keep them engaged, because many of the different generations are motivated by similar things. Now, of course, some of them, personal principles as an example, that could be quite a complex motivator because it depends on the principles. You'd have to ask the people themselves what they mean by that. But generally, there is a commonality in terms of motivators across generations in the workplace. So we've covered a lot in this section so far. We've identified common and important skills and motivators that candidates or employees need to have high potential in to be effective in role. But how do we try to identify this amongst our talent pool? How do we ascertain, how do we find out if our talent pool, our people in our organization, have these types of attributes? Well, let's consider some different forms of assessment to help you with this. So let's look at skills assessment. Now, the power of science has become as important as ever here. You need to be scientific in your approach. There are different types of assessment when it comes to skills. So let's take a look at some of these. The first one is inferred. You basically infer someone has a skill based on current and past jobs, and the skills are assumed. Now that can be quite, I'm not going to use the word dangerous per se, but that could be very inaccurate for you because it actually is backward looking and it lacks any sort of rigor. It's very hard to justify that about how you identify the skills of a particular individual or a set of individuals. So let's look at self-report then. Maybe we can ask the candidates, ask the employees if they have these skills. Self-report. This struggle to give you any new information because it relies on the person knowing themselves very well. How many people know themselves very well? That's the question to take away and think about. So clearly that's not the case for everyone. It's also backwards looking, and it wouldn't be able to help you predict how well they can perform in novel situations. So it actually lacks that rigor again when you're trying to make really important decisions about people's lives and making high decisions. So when it comes to assessment, SHL would really suggest you use objective, valid and fair measures of skill. Because clearly this is more objective. It unlocks insights for you as well as the individual. These types of assessments often help these individuals identify skills they may never have had, or maybe they didn't think they had. It helps you be more objective. It gives you full talent insight into your employee pool, and it also helps you when hiring people, of course, but also it's legally sound when making those career-defining decisions then about people. Now, when you look at these types of assessments, there's other ways you can evaluate if they're useful. Two of these different criteria might be whether they are easy to capture, which of these data sets is easy to get hold of and which are more difficult, but also how valuable is this data over time? How long will it be useful? Let's take a look. You'll probably have already predicted this, but inferred skills are fairly easy, relatively easy to gather because it's about inference, it's about someone's opinion. But it's backward looking, and it isn't really useful for very long, if useful at all. Self-reporting, well, that's a bit more difficult to gather because you have to go and ask them, or you have to find some way of gathering information about the candidate in terms of what they think they can do. But again, this data can outdate very quickly and still it doesn't have that rigor. Assessments, of course, do take more time to gather. The data takes more time to gather. It takes a bit more effort, but what we have found is this data can be useful for current decisions, but it can also be useful for future decisions because you don't have to assess everybody every time you want to make a decision if you have their skills objectively assessed at a point in time as well. So obviously, objective assessment then is slightly more difficult to gather, but much more effective for your decision making over time. Just referring then back to our SHL skills taxonomy, hopefully then you might have actually understood why we had to develop this for organizations we work with, because when you're trying to assess skills, the first thing you would do is, what do I assess? What does good look like? What sort of skills do I need? So this framework lends itself to allowing organizations to objectively assess their talent pools in accurate ways and build clear talent insight, so you can use more effective strategic talent management processes and make much more predictive and accurate decisions. Let's look at how that's done. This actually shows you in more depth the SHL taxonomy of skills. You can see that you can be very precise in what you're asking for from particular people. You can see maybe how you can profile roles very specifically with very specific skills within this taxonomy. So that means you can have unique skills profiles for different roles, so you can identify very quickly once you've assessed people, which people would fit those very specific skills and very specific roles. So it lends itself to being much more accurate and giving you very in-depth skills talent insight. How would you measure it? Well, SHL has actually created what we call an SHL Global Skills Assessment as an example of how you could do this. It's actually 15 minutes long, and it actually measures all 96 of those soft skills in our taxonomy. It's available in 19 languages, including Arabic. It allows you to actually measure all 96, but the reports that it generates can specifically look at very specific skills that you've identified for those very specific roles that you're considering people for. So it's very flexible in it can assess everything, but it can focus in on things that you really find important. It's got a good candidate experience, of course, because it takes 15 minutes and it's actually mobile enabled. That's just an example of how you can actually assess those soft skills. You may want to still assess functional skills, the knowledge skills, the technical skills. This is just an example of our portfolio that shows you how you could do that using various types of skills-based assessments over and above the soft skills that you'd be looking for. So you can get a rounded picture of people in terms of the assessments. And again, that encourages objective assessment of all the different types of skills you'd be looking for in somebody when considering them for a role in your organization. By having such a comprehensive but flexible skills framework, we've been able to design very specific job-focused assessments as well for organizations looking at very specific types of role or level of role. So you can see how if you're building your own skills taxonomy, you have to ensure it's comprehensive, so you can look at all these different areas of your organization and identify which specific skills are really important for those roles. Again, the same with technical skills. There's so many technical skills out there. This is SHL's own library of technical hard skills assessments, but don't forget that you should never forget the research going into hard skills, that they tend to become obsolete in a very much shorter time period. So trying to focus on just hard skills for a skills framework is likely to be very tough and not particularly useful for you. You really need to focus on those soft skills much more when it comes to those skills assessments. So how then, we've covered a lot and in a very short time, but how then can you apply this skills approach to your talent management practices? How can you do this in a best practice way? And which areas? Well, we would position that a skills-based approach can be actually used across the entire talent management cycle. So for instance, for hiring, promotion decisions by focusing in on the skills important for those roles. When you onboard people, you can have much more meaningful conversations because you're looking at trying to develop them in the areas very specific for the role they've come into the organization for. When developing people, you can be much more targeted in terms of the development so that it's beneficial for them, but it's also beneficial for the organization because you're targeting those very specific things you need them to excel in. And you can also look at individual and group development with skills-based approaches. Of course, it means you can mobilize your talent more effectively across the organization. If you have different roles and different career paths that require similar skills, you can actually give people a chance to move to different career paths based on the fact you know what skills they have available to them. And of course, high potential identification, where you're looking at people in terms of their abilities, their aspirations. You can really, skills-based approaches can really help you focus in on who are your high potentials, the people you really need to retain. And of course, finally, succession planning, a very important aspect. You can look at skills and you can look at the types of challenges people have in the roles they've been considered for, and identify if they're likely to be able to deliver those challenges effectively and have the right experience to be considered for the roles as well. So as you can see, it can be used across the entire talent management cycle with other, of course, approaches to blend into that assessment process as well. Now, another thing that could be quite useful, not from an organization, but from an individual point of view when it comes to skills, is something called skills personas. So the skills-based approach can open up an opportunity for these what's called skills personas, because this is not only knowing what skills are required in the role, but also it makes it easier to match individuals, because these roles already have, these people may have already have their own skills personas. They might have already identified their skills, and there are various websites that you can go into that show people with that show their skills. They tend not to use such objective assessments, but it is a starting point. But of course, it allows you to consider a talent marketplace where you identify the skills that are essential in the role and then go looking for those people that have those right combination of skills for you. So it opens up not just an organizational benefit, but benefits to individuals and makes it easier to match the organization and the role to the individual. So that I've covered this quite succinctly, and I'm hoping I haven't been too quick for everybody, but the final point that I'm going to make here is you can hopefully now see the benefits of a skills-based approach in talent management, and it can be applied across the entire talent management cycle. One key thing to think about here when you're going to, if you're going to start an approach like this, though, is where do you want to start? Across the entire talent management cycle, as I've said, the hiring process is probably the quickest win, and it's the easiest place to implement initially. But skills-based approaches are beneficial across the entire cycle. So really it is really considering where should I prioritize my initial success as a skills approach, and what sort of challenges would there be, but also what benefits would there be for me as well. But of course, I'm hoping you can see then the main benefits of a skills-based approach and the importance of knowing what skills are and having a real framework in place before you actually begin this process. I'm going to stop there, and I think that I thank you for listening and ask you if you have any questions whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. David, for your insightful and informative presentation. We will now proceed to the Q&A section. Here are some of the questions we have received. The first question is, what metrics or KPIs should be used to measure the success of reskilling programs?
Okay, so going back to some of the priorities that I mentioned earlier, agency, the equity, and actually, so there's a number of things a skills-based approach will help you with. One is to try and ensure that you have more effective employees in roles so they can be as productive as possible. So metrics there would be, has your organization improved its productivity, become more agile, become more delivered more for the clients you have? So those are the sorts of metrics, performance, organizational performance metrics. Of course, another thing that's really important, especially from talent management or HR, is what are the retention metrics like now? Have we retained more people? Have we actually are we actually to put people into relevant roles where they will be effective? What are the engagement levels like? So if your priority is to try and retain people and make people aspire to be more effective, those types of metrics will be more important. Of course, diversity, if your key priority is diversity, then how diverse is your organization in terms of the people within it and in terms of the roles at different levels? So there's some quick examples of metrics, if that makes sense. I'm hoping that answers the question.
Yes, of course. Our next question is, what are the potential long-term effects on a skill-based economy on job security and career progression for employees?
Oh, it's a big one. Okay. So let's think of some things off the top of my head. So Obviously, a skills-based approach would make people, well, once you've identified the skills people have, and individually, not just for the organization to identify, it makes you more, how to put it, it makes you more desirable in the talent marketplace, i.e., if you're in an organization where you're in a particular role, but you think maybe that role's not for me, or maybe you see that role's been phased out. But the fact that the organization knows what skills you have, and they know what skills are important in other roles in the organization, it's much more likely they're going to mobilize you into another role where you'd be effective rather than saying thank you and goodbye, because they know skills are scarce, you have those skills, where could they fit in the organization? So I would say, I would say that it makes people more marketable, and it probably does. And if you keep enhancing your skills and expanding the skills you have in an organization, improving yourself, it's much more likely you're going to have a longer career, not only in the organization you're in now, but you're going to have more options available to you in other organizations that use the same approach and know exactly what they're looking for, and you have it. Is that, I suppose, does that answer the question very quickly? People have written books on this sort of thing, but it would make it more likely that you would be able to move to different career paths, not just not just vertically but horizontally, but also you'd be more fairly identified for high potential programs because they know exactly what high potential looks like. You may have that, and it also means, of course, for leadership roles, that many different people from across the talent pool will be considered rather than small numbers, because organizations really do now have to cast the net across all their individuals to see if they have those talents, because talent is scarce, skills are scarce, and so they have to consider everybody in the organization to see what do they have it. It's much more inexpensive to mobilize your talent inside an organization than bring new people in, for instance. I've rambled a little bit there. I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, well, how can individuals stay proactive in their own skill development and career growth in a rapidly changing job market?
I suppose the first thing is high potentials that's a great question. That must be a high potential person, because high potentials tend to want to find ways of developing themselves proactively rather than waiting for their organizations to do it. I suppose one thing is to make sure that you have high levels of skill in the areas for your career. Keep identifying how the world of work is changing, what things are desirable, and keep reskilling yourself to stay relevant, for instance. So artificial intelligence, that's obviously a key thing now. You don't necessarily have to be an AI programmer, but it's useful if you know if you know what that is, and it's useful if you can know how to apply it potentially in your organization or find ways of asking for development in those areas. There's lots of other things other than AI, though, of course. So it really is about enhancing your broad skills. So you notice the 12 critical skills, for instance, I showed in the presentation. If you can really ensure that you are seen as having high competence in skills like that can be that are transferable across roles, then you're much more likely to have be able to move and have many different options, because you have those skills that are really important for those different range of roles. So try to develop yourself with the skills that can be transferable. If that's probably the best way to put it.
And what role do emerging technologies such as AI and machine learning play in facilitating reskilling and upskilling efforts?
Can you say that one again? Which particular role? Can you repeat that question? I didn't quite get that question.
Yeah, what role do emerging technologies such as AI and machine learning play in facilitating reskilling and upskilling efforts?
Well, obviously they will affect certain things. So you'll notice more and more AI being injected into different areas of the business. So I think artificial intelligence is moving dramatically into the human resources and talent management fields, for instance. So, but that doesn't mean that humans will become irrelevant. It means that the humans will be able to do things that the humans are much better at. So for instance, AI would be useful at helping you identify certain things about your employees, but the human is the better one when making this decisions about the employees. And in fact, we have created some principles with the federal authority about how to implement AI, for instance, when doing assessments. So yes, they can be used, but they should be. But you should be able to understand why it came to that decision, and it should always be a human that has oversight into any decision where AI is used. So a human should always be the one still making those decisions. So I suppose it really depends which area of the business, but there still will be a need for humans, but with very specific skills that will mean they will be using that technology or using the data from that technology in a more efficient way. Facilitate. I would say I'm going to answer the question based on how AI and other technology will affect roles rather than facilitate it. Unless, of course, you want to go straight into those types of roles, then of course you have to develop those very particular skills for those technologies. I'm not sure if I answered that question. It was a quite interesting and tricky question, that, but if not, I can have another think about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Edward. Thank you all for your participation and interest. We look forward to seeing you at our future sessions. Where we will continue to explore new and emerging topics in the field of human resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, same to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.